You know what we've lost in many ways today? The gift of imperfection, or we might call it the art of imperfection. Today I want to look at the role of imperfection and compromise and what the role that they play in a well-balanced life and community. My way into the subject is the American Constitution, and we get there on horseback. Or at least that's how James Madison and the 55 others who wrote the Constitution got there. Imagine Madison, 5'4", trotting to Philadelphia from Virginia over many days to attend the Constitutional Convention. The year is 1787. He's all alone. He's riding his horse across the land that's mostly undeveloped, without roads. He's crossing rivers that don't have bridges. It's a dangerous trip in many ways. It's been 11 years since the Declaration of Independence was penned. It's been 4 years since America won the Revolutionary War. During those first 4 years of this new republic, there was no constitution binding the 13 states together, but rather articles of confederation. The people and the various states were beginning to ask, what relationship and responsibilities do they have for one another and to one another? For example, who could settle disputes such as the one between Maryland and Virginia over the Potomac River? And was it okay for states like Rhode Island to tax anyone who traveled over its roads? It was becoming clear that the Articles of Confederation were not enough. So politicians like James Madison and Alexander Hamilton called for a convention, and they came on horseback from every state except Rhode Island. Rhode Island boycotted, feeling that nothing good could come to their state from such a convention. They met in Independence Hall in Philadelphia under the Liberty Bell, where 11 years earlier, the Continental Congress came together and drafted the Declaration of Independence. After some reluctance, George Washington agreed to head up the convention. He was taller than all the others at 6'2", and was the most beloved and glorified man in the States, having been the commander of the army that defeated the British. Benjamin Franklin was in attendance. He was 81 years old. Franklin was one of the few people there who was also part of the creating of the Declaration of Independence. He was thought to be the second most renowned American after Washington, and was the elder statesman of this convention. The convention lasted through long, blistering summer months. It was often swelteringly hot, and they kept the windows and the doors of the hall closed in order to keep their deliberations secret and private until they'd finished. They'd debate all day, and then they would retire to some of the saloons of Philadelphia, and they drank large quantities of alcohol and debated through the night. Who were these men? They were brilliant, passionate, idealistic, and flawed. Nearly half of them owned slaves. All of them were wealthy. There were no women who participated in the convention. Now keep in mind, this was a very different project than the formation of the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration was a moral document that stated principles of inherent human worth and inherent human rights. But the Constitution had to be a practical framework for government and for governing this new democracy. There were huge disagreements about how to organize power, how to create an equitable balance between large and small states. Should representation be based on the size of the population or be distributed equally among the states regardless of size? What kind of president should we have? How much power should the president have? Who should elect the president? And what should be the term of office? What offenses should be impeachable? How should judges be appointed? There were those, like Madison, who did not want a direct democracy. And people like Hamilton, who wanted America to have an elected monarch. If it were up to him, George Washington would have become the popularly elected king of the new United States. To his credit, Washington would not have it. James Wilson, who is an understated hero of the Republic, is one of the only ones, and definitely the most persuasive, who argues that the people should elect the president directly. Now keep in mind that this is a time in history when there are no democracies of this kind anywhere in the world. This is an amazing occurrence to have popularly elected men debating and deciding the future of their nation. People the world over are ruled by monarchs and emperors, tyrants and despots. Many of the men in Independence Hall are aware of the failures of former democracies centuries earlier in Greece and Rome. Madison referenced these historical examples to argue that an unchecked, direct democracy can lead to demagogues in leadership who appeal to the masses and to the tyranny of the majority. Others countered that an aristocratic democracy, led by those who were thought to be wiser and more worthy, can lead to oligarchy and the tyranny of the minority. What's been called the Frankenstein baby of this dispute is the Electoral College. A combination of direct democracy to elect the president with a system that involves a set of electors who in fact indirectly elect the president and who can supersede the majority of the electorate either due to the proportional distribution of electors or, if deemed necessary, by the electors for the good of the republic. These 230-year-old debates are still relevant and happening today. And as we continue to debate the merits of the Electoral College versus the direct election of a president, we are also experiencing the resurgence of populism and questions arising about the future of constitutional government in light of the era of social media, globalization, and mass immigration. Now, back in 1787, slavery is a major issue for this country and for the convention. Pennsylvania and Massachusetts had already begun gradual emancipation. What would be the future of slavery in this new nation? 25 of the 55 in attendance owned slaves. Benjamin Franklin spoke against slavery. He used to own several slaves himself, but had freed them and had become an unspoken advocate against slavery and was the leader of the Pennsylvania Abolition Society. Quaker John Dickerson argued forcefully against slavery during the convention. He was once Delaware's largest slaveholder, but had freed all of his slaves by 1787. Delegates from South Carolina, including Charles Pinckney, have slaves and they argue for slavery. George Washington and others also have slaves but believe it's wrong and are conflicted about how to deal with it in the Constitution. In fact, George Washington had over 100 slaves at the time. This did not jive with what was promised in the Declaration of Independence. 1/5 of the population of the states was made up of slaves at the time. These men, women, and children did not benefit from the war that he had won or the Constitution that was ultimately drafted. George Mason, a slaveholder himself, argues that slavery is a national sin that would bring the judgment of heaven upon the country. Ellsworth from Connecticut agrees with Mason and adds that if it's about morality, then we should not only ban the importation of slaves, but we should also free all the slaves. Now, Charles Pinckney and others from the South said that there is no way that the Constitution would ever have a chance of being ratified in their states if slavery is outlawed. So in the end, nowhere in the document does the word slave or slavery appear. However, the decision of who gets counted for the proportioning of delegates to Congress and for the purpose of taxation forces the issue. Of course, the southern states, like Virginia and the Carolinas, want slaves to be counted for the purpose of representation in Congress, but not for taxation. Northerners do not want slaves counted for representation, but because they basically understand that this would increase the number of delegates given to the slaveholding states. However, the North thinks that slaves should be counted for the apportioning of taxation. So the end result of this debate is called the 3/5 compromise, a massive inequity embedded into the Constitution. Slaves and slavery are mentioned only indirectly in the Constitution. Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3 prescribes that 3/5 of all other persons are to be counted for the appointment of seats in the House of Representatives and direct taxes. Additionally, Article 4, Section 2, Clause 3, slaves are referred to indirectly as persons held in service or labor. Neither side was happy with this compromise, but they were all willing to go along with it to ensure the passage of the Constitution and the creation of the new nation. Before the convention ends, a clause is included that says that the Congress cannot entertain any law to abolish slavery for 20 years, until at least 1808. This was another compromise that allowed them to push the problem down the road, but for both to feel some sense of being included. For Southerners, it protected the slave trade for 2 more decades at least. For Northerners and abolitionists, it gave a clear path to end slavery eventually. Nevertheless, the 3/5 compromise gave slaveholding states disproportionate influence in the presidency, the Speaker of the House, and the Supreme Court in the period before the Civil War. It also kept the inhumane practice of slavery alive in America for almost another century. And it would take a civil war and the death of hundreds of thousands of young men across this nation before it would be abolished. Abraham Lincoln would come to see the war as divine punishment of our nation's sin of slavery. In a letter in April of 1864 to Albert Hodges, who was a Kentucky editor, Abraham Lincoln wrote, "God now wills the removal of a great wrong, and wills also that we of the North, as well as you of the South, shall pay fairly for our complicity in it." And later, in his second inaugural, Lincoln said it in even more resounding prose. "Fondly do we hope, fervently do we pray, that this mighty scourge of war may speedily pass away. Yet, if God wills that it continue until the wealth piled up by the bondsman's 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, and until every drop of blood that was drawn by the lash shall be paid for by another drawn by the sword, so shall it be said that the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether." Now, whether you agree with Lincoln's theology that the Civil War and its destruction was God's wrath for America for its sinfulness of building a nation without paying for the labor of those who did the work, the Civil War was a direct and devastating outcome of America's moral failure. It's impossible to know what would have come of this new nation had there not been the spirit of compromise that allowed the Constitution to be ratified. Who knows what would have been created if there were women or African Americans, the likes of Frederick Douglass or Ida B. Wells, at the Constitutional Convention. We will never know. What we know is that a set of men with incredible minds came together in 1787 and developed a document and a form of democracy that expresses the hopes and the visions of a government by the people, for the people, and of the people. A framework for a nation that understood that it would need to keep working to create a more perfect union. A constitution that has been the foundation of over 200 other national constitutions around the world. Even as many today hold this document in almost sacred reverence, let's keep in mind that nobody left the convention completely happy. It is and was an imperfect document that was born of hundreds of compromises. As the men gathered to sign the final document that they'd created before sending it to the states for ratification, Franklin acknowledged that this is imperfect. He explains that any time a group of men gather, they come with their prejudices, their passions, their errors, and their selfish views. It's a human document in its imperfection, yet Franklin also says that he is surprised at how close it comes so near to perfection. He says it's not in all ways how he would have it. But he then says that as I get older, the more apt I am to doubt my own judgments and to respect the judgments of others. He encourages the others to doubt their infallibility and encourages them all to sign the new Constitution. The Bill of Rights is soon added because states didn't want to ratify it without one. They wanted clearly defined protections for free speech and a free press and to bear arms. Knowing that it was imperfect and a work in progress, they needed it to be adaptable to the future, and so they created an amendment process. The first 10 were added immediately and are known as the Bill of Rights. Only 17 more have been added in over 200 years. Such amendments as the abolition of slavery, term limits for the president, rights for women to vote, prohibition, and the end of prohibition. There have been over 11,000 attempts to amend the Constitution. Only 27 have ever been accepted. In the same way, the founders of this church didn't know what would become of All Souls. They didn't know that one day we'd have a humanist service. They didn't know that we would be among the earliest advocates of civil rights and marriage equality. But like the founders of this nation, the founders of this church put forth their best efforts at creating a religious path rooted in a vision of liberty, in an evolving vision grounded in democratic principles, and each generation continues to help us to create a more perfect union. One of the things that makes it work is a willingness to accept a certain level of imperfection and compromise. Now today, there are some members who do not agree with the decision to move downtown, for example. Do we have a Ben Franklin among our elders who will use his or her influence and say, as Franklin did, that it is not in all ways how I would have it, but that as I get older, the more apt I am to doubt my own judgments and to respect the judgments of others? Do we have someone like Franklin among us who will inspire others to doubt their infallibility and encourage us all to support the direction of the vast majority of the church and its leaders? Do we have an elder like Abe Lincoln who will work tenaciously in order to keep the union together because he or she believes fervently in the value of our church as an expression of religious freedom, the likes of which the world has never known? on this summer morning, 230 years after the Constitutional Convention. Let us be inspired by our founders to be a beacon of liberty. We all come with our own passions and prejudices, preferences, and self-interests. We will never have a perfect church, but let's keep working to create a more perfect church. And let's remember that we are doing something that has never been done before. In that way, we are following a great American tradition in this American faith. Amen.
You're visiting with us online today. We love connecting with people all across the country and around the world, sharing our powerful message of love beyond belief.
There's something new happening here. You can now join All Souls as a virtual member. Our virtual membership is designed for friends who live outside of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and who want to engage with All Souls in a meaningful way.
You can be part of an expanding family, a global family really, wherever you are. If you live in Oklahoma,
Ohio,
or Orange County, California,
Canada,
or Cameroon. By becoming a virtual member, you'll be able to deepen your connections with members and friends here in Tulsa and with members wherever you are.
Each week, you'll receive special All Souls content tailored for you, our virtual members. Virtual members have access to pastoral care, to personal prayers, and also receive invitations to exclusive web events.
You can learn more, and if you're ready, you can become a virtual member today by visiting allsoulschurch.org/virtual membership.
We're grateful our ministries are having a positive impact on your life, and we want to share the good news of love beyond belief with more and more people. So no matter what, we need your support to keep this ministry growing and thriving, so please consider making a gift today. You can do so by texting
Love BB for Love Beyond Belief to 73256, or simply visit our website. You are a blessing in our lives. May you be blessed
and be a blessing.